Have you ever watched the television show Naked and Afraid and have just had so many questions? Well, I have too. And today I actually get to ask some of those questions because I have the honor of interviewing Wes Harper. Wes owns an IT company here in North Carolina. He is also the father of 5. He also successfully completed a 21-day challenge in Brazil. If you'd like to look up the episode, it is called Stalked on the Savannah, and it's in 2 parts. Welcome to Beyond the Lens podcast and my interview with Wes Harper. So welcome to Beyond the Lens podcast, and our guest today is Wes Harper. And Wes, we have to know, how does somebody, a father of 5, who owns an IT company, go from that to naked and afraid for 21 days in Brazil?
Well, not easily, I can tell you that. But I've always been an outdoorsman, even from the time I was a baby. My parents were both very outdoorsy. And we weren't the type of family that stayed in hotels when we traveled. We had tents, and we would stay at a campground. And I was told that we were camping before I could ever walk. And so I was brought up in an outdoor environment and fishing very early, hunting when I was 8 years old. It was just a complete outdoor experience. And this is also many years ago when, your parents would kick you out of the house when it got daylight. And then it's not you weren't allowed back in until night, but you were encouraged to stay outside as much as possible. And so that's what we did. Right. We stayed outside constantly.
Because I don't want people to think that this is an experience that you go from sitting on your sofa and, okay, I went camping a couple of times, so I think I'm going to apply. There's a lot more involved than that.
Oh, there's so much more involved. In fact, the amount of, even just the things you don't think about, the amount of paperwork involved is unbelievable. I mean, you have to sign away, your life, tattoo releases.
Oh, wow.
You have to sign up with your emergency contact, your next of kin, non-disclosures, everything that you could possibly imagine. I mean, it is a telephone book worth of paper that you have to do.
Wow.
Without even thinking about the survival portion of it. And so, no, I was one of those guys watching from my couch, yelling at the TV about doing things wrong and doing things right. And I always tell this story, but my wife signed me up because she was so tired of me yelling at the TV. And she said, okay, smart guy, we're signing you up. That's enough. And somehow I got chosen to take it to the next step of interviews, and that started the process.
So roughly how long between her putting in this application for you did it take to actually say
go?
Yeah.
It was a solid year.
Wow.
It was a long process, and I don't know much about the TV and production business, but I'm realizing that everything just takes a lot of time. As it was hard to maintain that level of excitement for that long, and I really didn't know I was going until probably 30 days before I actually went.
Wow.
You go through the process and you feel like I'm getting warmer. It's looking like it's going to happen. But until very close to when you leave, you don't really know if you're going to get the nod that you're the guy going on the show. So there's a lot of anticipation.
So what changes along the way? Let's say, okay, you've put in your application. Do you start preparing at that point, and how does that change once you get the nod that says, oh yeah, and by the way, you're going?
Well, when you put in the application and you get that first call from Los Angeles, the first thing you do is you tell everybody, because you can't actually believe that somebody called you back, in that arena. So you're really excited about that, and you're hopeful, but you really don't think it's going to happen. Or at least in my case, I really didn't think it was going to happen. I thought, well, this is a fun distraction right now, and I'm gonna enjoy it to its fullest. And then when it's over, I'll just go back to regular working guy stuff. But as the process went on, it got more in depth, more questions. Paperwork started coming out at 6 months. And all of a sudden, you have to start getting some vaccines. And when you get vaccines, you start to really know that something really might happen. So about that time is when you take off your shoes and you start walking barefoot. You start going on YouTube and looking up every single kind of trap that you could ever make. And then you go out in your backyard and you start practicing those things. I probably bought 10 different fire starters and 5 different machetes just to see which ones were best. And this is all before I knew I was really going, but things were heating up. And I didn't want to be underprepared if they said, yes, it's time to go.
So are there restrictions with what you can bring in with you? Because I always say that you're allowed to bring one thing.
Yeah, there are restrictions. You can't bring things like a lighter. You can't bring matches. You can't bring a multi-function tool. It has to be a very simple device.
Okay.
And I've seen people bring everything from bow drills to duct tape to what I brought was rope. I mean, it runs really the whole gamut, but there are definitely things that you can't even think about taking.
Mm. So when were you told that it would be Brazil? How far in advance?
I was told about 2 weeks before I left that it was Brazil. I was told I was going a month prior to the challenge, and in about 2 weeks, they said, okay, here's the location. Here's your plane tickets. Get ready. So I had about 2 weeks to do some real research on Brazil and the area that I was going to be located in. Although the areas are so remote, the amount of information you can get is very limited. So you find everything you can, and then you cross your fingers and hope that you've prepared well enough for whatever environment you get stuck in.
And do you have any introduction to your partner prior to meeting them, or no?
No, you don't get any introduction at all. In fact, it's mass secrecy.
Wow.
It's not happenstance. I mean, it's very, very planned, very coordinated. There were times where I had to wear a blindfold in certain areas because there was a chance we could cross paths.
Wow.
And so really the first time you meet the partner is when you see them on camera.
Wow.
It's very, very accurate.
So you're in that truck and you're going to your drop-off destination. How long of a ride roughly do you think that was?
It seemed like about 8 hours. It was probably only 30 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe 45. But yeah, it seems like it is forever because you're so anxious, you're excited, you're extremely nervous, and a year's worth of hoping and waiting has boiled down to this last little bit. And so time goes by. Every second takes about 5 seconds.
And when you're in that truck and you're headed in, do you go into this with a partnership mindset, or do you go into this with, well, this is my challenge and I'm going to worry about myself?
It's kind of both. I prioritized that it was my challenge because at the end of the day, I was the one that was going to have to make it. But part B was, I really want my partner to make it too. And so I'm going to do everything I can to help my partner or be a good assistant to my partner in some cases, whatever you can do to bring them along. But I would say first and foremost, you have to mentally say that I'm going to do this challenge. I think if you do it the opposite way, I don't think that's a good recipe for success.
Yeah, it seems like there has to be an element of, I'm the one that has to do this, because in the end, you don't know if it's going to be just you.
You have no idea. You really don't. Your partner could tap out in 24 hours. And so you have to be prepared to be on your own.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you don't get your mind right, you're really setting yourself up for real failure.
So tell us a little bit about Jess, your partner. Jessie, I'm sure, sorry. She seemed like a really tough girl. That poor thing also got bit by all kinds of things. And tell us about her, though.
All right. Yes, she is tough as nails. And yes, she got bit and stung and stabbed and scraped the entire time. And that's not to say I didn't, but she seemed to take the brunt of most of that. She was a lot different than I was. She was only 28 years old and I was 48 at the time. And so good deal younger than me. She was a very emotional person.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in a negative context, in a positive. If she felt like she needed to have a little cry, she would have a cry. If she wanted to laugh real hard, she'd laugh real hard. If she wanted to be sad for a while, she was sad for a while. And that was good. I'm a little more closed off with my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not how I respond to things, but that's what she did, and it worked for her. But yeah, she was really tough, and she was a really good partner.
That's great.
Two completely different styles, but when we put them together, it worked very well for us.
Yeah, that came across when I was watching it. So it also seems like you start bleeding almost immediately, and you just keep going with it. What was the first thing that drew blood for you?
Oh, I'm sure I stepped on something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As soon as you get out of the truck and you have to take off your clothes, then all of a sudden you're really vulnerable to anything. I mean, you walk by branches all day long when you have clothes, and it doesn't do anything at all. You walk by one when you're bare skin, and it'll scrape you.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, you get bloody the first 5 minutes, and that's other than disrobing in front of cameras. I mean, that's a really get real moment for you. But as soon as you start bleeding, that's really when you go, wow, this is everything that I signed up for and more. Yeah, that's the real eye-opening stage, is when you start bleeding and the gnats start climbing in your sore.
See, and that would be the worst part for me, would be the critters. I'm not good with critters. And there's a lot of critters in Brazil.
Yeah, a lot of critters. I think most people's number one problem are the bugs and
Mm-hmm.
the critters. I mean, it's overwhelming, and it'll really mess with your mind if you let it. You get gnats droning in your ears all day. I mean, it can really drive you crazy, and not to mention getting bit and stung.
It seemed incessant.
It was absolutely incessant. You didn't have obviously a watch or anything, but you could almost tell what time of day it was by what bug was biting you. It seemed they came out in phases. And so I knew it was about lunchtime when the horseflies would come out, because they came out in the middle part of the day. I knew that at 5 o'clock in the morning, the black flies would wake me up, because they'd be landing on me and biting me then. So, it was really staged, but it was constant.
Yeah. What do you
Tough.
think what would you say the worst part was?
There's a lot of worst parts. I mean, it's really hard to narrow down the absolute worst part. But I'll give you two things.
Okay.
One, being away from your family
Mm-hmm.
is really awful. I've got a very close family, and we talk, all the time, and you see each other all the time. And then all of a sudden, when you don't have that, you're really underprepared for that. You don't really know how to handle that. And so that's really horrible. Your heart aches for your wife and to see your kids. That's tough to get over. And so that's a daily struggle you go through. And then on a physical side, of course, the bugs. But I found one of the toughest parts was laying on the ground at night. I went into the challenge about 20 pounds heavier on purpose. And so I had a little layer of fat between my bones and the ground. And that's hard enough for anybody who's slept on the ground just even one night. But then throughout the course of the challenge, I ended up losing 37 pounds.
Wow.
And so I had no fat between joints
Mm.
and the cold, hard ground. And I had to invent new ways to stand up every day
Oh,
because
wow.
it was so painful just to try to get yourself upright. Yeah,
Hmm.
that was really brutal, the sleeping on the ground part.
Did you ever see anything in the mix of it all and think, what in the world is that?
You know, I've been outdoors enough that I've seen a lot of stuff. You know, there's always some random bug or caterpillar or beetle. And you go, whoa, that's weird. But no, I was pretty familiar with critters, and
Hmm.
so nothing like that really surprised me. I was okay with all of that. There wasn't anything to it. The only thing weird that I saw was I'd never been in the presence of big termite mounds before,
Hmm.
and so you see, you know, a 3 foot tall termite mound
Oh,
just out of
wow.
nowhere. So that, and then the bee's nests that we saw, they could be 6 feet tall
Wow.
and 3 feet wide and just chock full of bees hanging on the side of a cliff. And so I'd never seen that before. And first one I saw, I had no idea what that was. Only
Wow.
when I got close and got stung did I really have full appreciation for what was going on.
Yeah. Wow. Now, because I watched you do things one way and I watched Jesse do things another way, do you think that men and women bring something different into this challenge or approach it differently from your experience?
Um, you know, I don't know if it's gender specific or just people specific.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of factors that went in, whether she was a woman or she was only 28 years old. I was 48, a man, I had 5 kids, she didn't have any. So we both brought something different, but I'm not sure that it was gender specific. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen the show where there's some women on there that were incredibly tough, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and put their little man partner to shame.
Mm-hmm.
So I really don't, I don't think that any comment I made on that would probably be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's up to the individual person of what they bring to the table. And I'm not sure it's gender specific.
So then what would you say that the biggest strength that you walked into it with was, and was it the same one you walked out with?
Um, I think things through pretty well. I'm a little more quiet person and I kind of plan things and strategize. And I'm a very calm individual. And so I'm not highly reactive to anything.
Mm-hmm.
No, you know, gut reaction to something and I freak out. I'm very, very planned and calm under pressure, really. And so I think that really helped me out because I was able to plan what I was going to do, my
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And if it fell apart, I didn't freak out. I just made a new plan
Mm-hmm.
and adapted to whatever had to be done. And I think that was like a big strength of mine going in. And when I left, it was pretty much intact. You know, when I got in the old Jeep, I mean, my plan worked. You know, I had done it. I was miserable and tired and hungry and skinny and dirty, but it worked. So I
Mm-hmm.
felt like that was it was a decent strategy, and I felt like that served me well the entire time.
And so let's talk about that for a minute. You go through this whole challenge. You trek through all this horrible stuff with bare feet and whatnot. I know at one point I saw you. I think you guys trekked about 8 miles or something like that to another location, and it was worse than the first location. And so, what do you do in a situation like that where now you just landed into worse?
Right. Uh, you really have to just take a minute. You have to take a minute and say to yourself, okay, well, this is what it is now. And there's not much I can do about it. And so, how am I going to make the best of this situation that I'm in now?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think my calmness and planning came into play because I was able to, you know, to breathe deep for a little bit, take a second, you know, do the whole poor me thing, and then get back to, okay, well, this is what I have. And so I now have to make a new plan and we have to make the best of this situation instead. So yeah, that was a brutal walk. And it was really disheartening to come into a place that was seemingly worse than where I started.
Yeah.
I was really upset on day 2 and day 3. I was like angry because my plan was to make every day a better day, improve my situation every day. And here I am on day 3 and my situation is worse than it was on day 1. So that was very disheartening. And I really had to get over that as quickly as possible.
Is there any trick to pushing through the exhaustion or pushing through the oh, poor me?
I think that's where it comes in handy that I'm a dad of 5 children. Really, I've raised infants. I was a stay-at-home dad with my first child. And so one, you learn how to operate when you're very tired. You can't just phone it in and say, oh, I'm not going to feed the baby today, or I'm not going to change the diaper. You have to function. And so I had the benefit of that experience of knowing how to operate when I was dead on my feet, exhausted. And that's one thing that Jessie didn't have the benefit of because she didn't have any children. And so she got tired and she was grumpy and needed some sleep. Whereas I was really tired and I was grumpy, but I was okay. I learned how to function under those types of conditions before. So that worked out really well for me.
So you finally make it to the end. You get in the Jeep at the end, and now what are you thinking?
The relief you have is unparalleled. Because you have spent the better part of a year waiting for your event, planning for it, hoping for it. And then the second you get there, you're committed to it. And every day, all you're trying to do is get to the finish line. And so when you get in that Jeep, I mean, it's emotional. I had tears in my eyes and I was just doing, oh, thank goodness that this is over. That I accomplished my goal and it's over and I can, talk to my family probably in an hour or 2 and I can get something to eat and I can clean my grubby self up and brush my teeth. It's just this feeling of relief that you actually fulfilled the plan you made. You cross the finish line, and it was a wonderful feeling to sit down in that Jeep. You let your guard down, the emotions come out, and you're just so happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the experience like for your family?
Well, two-phase. Most of my kids are college age and off. I still had 2 at home, but they're older teenagers. And so, older teenagers, they do their own thing anyway. So, my youngest, I'm not sure she knew I was gone. No, that's not true. But on the family, I mean, it's a little challenging. They know I'm a wild and crazy guy, so they weren't like shocked. They were surprised I actually got on the show, but they weren't shocked that I was going to do it. But yeah, they missed me. They missed talking to me on the phone and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it was rough on the kids, but I just think they missed old dad. And then my wife, it was rough on her because, we're best friends. We talk all the time. We make excuses to have lunch together during the work day, all that. And then all of a sudden you go from that to just total abstinence of all things. There's none of that. And so I know that was really tough on her. And she also had to carry the load at home for all the stuff that I was neglecting. And so she has a full-time job. And I know that was extremely difficult to go from having a partner in all those things to being on your own. So she held up really well, but I know she was ready for that to be over when it was.
So what did you learn from this experience that you'll carry forward, whether it be in business, life, any of it?
Well, I think being out in that environment, and the only thing you have to worry about is really getting food, getting water, staying warm, being as safe as possible. I think that affected me in a way that when I got back to technology, I own an IT company, so we're technology people. And you really don't have to check your email every 5 minutes. It's going to be okay. If somebody texts you, that doesn't mean you need a 30-second response back. It's okay if it sits on your phone for a while you're doing something else, while you're having a conversation with your family and your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to leave the conversation to go check your phone. I think that was a big takeaway for me, that the pressures that we put on ourselves are really just that. It's not so important to be always available and to respond immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little slower pace of life now with regards to all that. I still get everything done, which is the good part, because you can.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to approach it in a little different way. So that was one of my big takeaways.
I love that.
Yeah,
so is it something that you'd do again?
After the 21 days, when I was sitting in the Jeep and for the next 48 hours, I said, no way in hell would I ever do anything like that again. I wanted to see if I could survive. I checked the box. I did it, put it away. No problem. But then when your mind can't let go of it and you think about it every 5 minutes, it starts to creep back in. And so I think within a week, after declaring I would never do anything like that again to the world, I reached back out to the producer and I said, if there are any other opportunities, I would be available for them. So just a week later, I had made a total mind shift and I said, wow, yeah, I really would do that again. It was, and I don't want to say enjoyable, but it was fantastic. Yeah, it was a true experience that very few people will ever get to do.
True. Seemed very life-changing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, if there's another opportunity out there, I would welcome it.
Wow. So one last question. If you had 5 minutes to go back and talk to the guy who started, knowing what you know now, what would you tell him?
I think I would probably tell him to pay more attention 30 days before the challenge and 30 days after the challenge. You forget that everyone around you is also involved. Your family, they don't want to hear you talk about Naked and Afraid for 4 weeks prior to you going to Naked and Afraid, where you're going to be away. You need to concentrate on them, and listening to how your wife's day at work was, and being supportive of your family. And on the flip side, when you get back, you're not back. You're physically present, but your mind is still back into the challenge. You're thinking about the thousands of things that happened while you were there. And it's very hard to focus on anybody else. It's very selfish. And so I would have a talk with myself and say, hey, knock it off, compartmentalize, put that away, and spend good quality time reacquainting yourself with your family, finding out what you missed while you were away, what struggles they went through, and don't hog the show with details that people have already heard or might, they care about it, but they have their own things going on in their lives. And you need to be cognizant of that. You need to just not be so selfish about my experience. Everyone has experiences and you need to be open to that.
That's great. Well, thank you so very much, Wes. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thanks very much. It absolutely was. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you for joining us today. For other podcast episodes or an interest in working with me, please visit marlanasemenza.com. Join the mailing list or reach out to me to schedule a complimentary call. As a personal brand photographer, I have had the privilege of working with some amazing people to tell their stories, and I'd love to hear yours.